Consensus Network.
Corey, great to see you again.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, and Lauren, you recognize Corey. Where do you think?
Yeah, Miami. I think, Miami.
That's right. Did you actually watch me on stage?
Yeah, Safedine and Corey and you.
That's right. So I've been following your work anyway and been aware of you, Corey, for a long time. You're actually part of one of our global homeschooling summits. I think you were interviewed by Liz Quain for that one. She was part of Galileo at the time. And
Kubro.
It's now Kubro. Yeah, and been following what you're doing. And obviously you're quoted in Safedine's book, The Fiat Standard. You've been on Marty Bent's podcast. You're on the Bitcoiners radar. I hope Bitcoin's on yours. If not, we'll do our best to make sure you are.
Yeah, totally. I think we have some synergies and ideological overlap, obviously. And if Bitcoin Magazine wants to keep inviting me to come back, I will join every year. I saw that they're actually having something in Amsterdam soon, but I'd had a schedule conflict.
That's correct. Yes, in October. So yeah, for the listeners that weren't aware or haven't seen the panel that we were part of, I hosted a panel about education at the Bitcoin Miami conference, and Corey and Safe were the two guests. And I've watched it back, and I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to invite you onto the podcast to have a lengthier conversation. Regular listeners of this show know that 3 out of 4 of my kids are homeschooled. I'm a big advocate for homeschooling, unschooling, world schooling. Call it whatever you like. Call it actual real education if you want. And I really, really am trying my best to push people to think about the institutions and to where they're sending their kids and why. And I think that's going to lead into Lauren's first question here.
Is the education system bad?
Broken.
Or broken, excuse me.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you look at it, but I would say it actually it's working just as it was intended. If you look at the history, look at books like those by John Taylor Gatto, you can see our compulsory education system actually started in Massachusetts with the first compulsory education law, with the likes of Horace Mann supporting the proposal. And he actually went to Prussia, which is modern day Germany, in the 1930s, I want to say. And their whole system, which we adopted here in the United States, was built to create obedient soldiers. They had just lost a war, and their leaders had basically said, well, what better way to create strong fighting soldiers who will really fight for our country than to start young, to indoctrinate them at a young age to be obedient soldiers. And that's the system that we adopted here in the United States. And you can see a lot of the remnants of that still today, where if you want to go to the bathroom, you have to raise your hand. Things are more about listening to the teacher and being obedient than actually getting a good education. So when we see that resources have been poured into the system more and more and more each and every year, since 1970, after adjusting for inflation, we've increased per student education expenditures by about 152% in real terms. But the outcomes in terms of academics haven't gotten 152% better. So it might be that we're looking at the wrong outcomes. Maybe the system isn't really designed to focus on improving math, reading, and writing. Maybe they're focused more on creating citizens that align with whoever's in charge's values. And we're seeing some of that today too, where you have a lot of fights within the school system over the past few years, ever since the remote learning happened associated with COVID, when the teachers unions fought to keep the schools closed. Parents got a glimpse of what was happening in the classroom and started to see that actually they aren't focusing all that much on the basics. They're focusing on ideological conformity, and there are concepts such as CRT that have baked their way, critical race theory, into the curriculum. And there's a lot of fights right now about gender ideology being introduced into the classroom as well, as opposed to just focusing on the basics. And if you look back towards the history about how people use the school system to create citizens that were aligned with their own values and not the parents' values, it starts to make more sense as to why we have people, particularly leftists, who have infiltrated the government school system to indoctrinate kids to align with how they want them to be raised. So that you have a large segment of society, or at least one side of the ideological spectrum, that is using the school system to raise other people's kids, and there's no other way to see it.
So, in short answer to your question, yes, it's bad, and one, it's not broken, and that's pretty dark. when you do read into it, when you read Taylor Gatto's work, and it's eugenics, right? At the end of the day, that's what this is. It's about indoctrinating people to organize a society the way that they wish it to be organized.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And look, I mean, if we're really focusing just on education, I think that occurs, and I think you've made a great decision to homeschool 3 of your children. And when I have children one day, I just got married. Hopefully, kids are coming soon. We would like to homeschool our kids as well. But I mean, just thinking back, even I went to government-run schools in Texas all through K through 12, and I remember, listening to the lectures each day. But that's not when I was actually learning the material. I learned the material at home. I would read the books myself. I would talk to my parents. I would talk to my peers, and have those conversations to learn the material when I was interested and wanted to do so. And so that seems more like a homeschooling situation would be more adept at actually having the learning take place. Whereas when I would go into the classroom, I don't remember actually learning the information when the teachers were just trying to force it down my throat. I think it has to be a student-centered approach. I think it has to be driven by the interest of the kid, or else the information is not going to stick. And so I think the factory model school system that we have today is not really set up for learning all that well. Maybe it works for some people, but looking back, it doesn't really work for me, and it didn't really work all that well for me. And before we start kindergarten, we're learning how to walk, we're learning how to speak. It's not because of a centralized bureaucracy that's forcing us to learn how to walk and speak and read. It's because small human beings are interested in learning those things, and parents can guide them to be able to figure it out. When we finish high school, and if we don't go to college, or when we finish college and we leave that formal school setting, how do we learn? Well, we read things, we seek out information from experts, we ask our friends, and now we have the internet these days. We can look up basically anything and find out information from the experts at our fingertips. So I think that's how you actually digest information. And hopefully the school system starts to adapt and starts to learn from that reality. And I think it's already starting. Since COVID and the school closures, a lot of people started to figure out, they had the schooling at home. I wouldn't really call it homeschooling, because some of it was government schooling at home through the Zoom and through the computer. But some parents did actually switch to real homeschooling and disenrolled their kids from the government school system. And they started to figure, parents who thought that they couldn't do it, they started to reach a new level of confidence and started to see their kids were less anxious, that they were learning more material at a fraction of the time, and they stuck with homeschooling. So I think there's a lot of changes that are occurring. According to the Census Bureau, relative to pre-pandemic levels, homeschooling has approximately doubled. So that's a huge shift in a short amount of time. And we're also seeing in states that pass school choice provisions, allowing the funding that would go to the government school to follow the kid to things like micro schools or other home-based education options. We're seeing micro schools sprout up in states like Arizona that have universal school choice. You have families using their savings account dollars that would have otherwise gone to the government institutions. They're using it to pay for private tutors at these micro schools that are sprouting up in large numbers, so much that the Wall Street Journal actually wrote an article on one of their providers called Prenda. And the title of the editorial was "The Teachers Union's Tiny Little Enemy." And the reason they wrote this piece was that they found a leaked document from the teachers unions that had an opposition research sheet written up about parental micro schools because they were so fearful of this new change in the market. The teachers unions wanted the kids to go into their unionized government-run schools, and they started to see that families are really liking these micro schools instead. So they're doing opposition research on them already. So things are changing, not as quickly as you or I would probably like, but I see a lot of good news coming in the last few years.
Awesome. And we'll dive into all of that. Do you have any further questions, Lauren?
No.
No? Okay. Well, do you want to say goodbye then?
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to hear that those numbers in homeschooling have shot up. And like I think you said this, that many people weren't even aware of their options, their choice. That they're just, we are so programmed as human beings into believing that the only way through life is to have the 2.4 children once you've been married and got the white picket fence. And then once your most amazing little bundle of joy reaches a certain age, that's it. And you rev them up for it as well. You know, it's really damaging, and I'm guilty of it myself. You know, all of my kids, when they were young, it's like, oh, right, yeah, it's coming up to the big day, and nannies and granddads and aunties and uncles get involved. And they put all of this pressure, and all of this pressure is on the kid from the earliest of ages, could be 3, 4, or 5 years of age, depending on which country or which state you're living in. So do you just want to give a quick overview of, I know you're very US-based, US-centric, the different rules, different laws that people in the US might be able to look into, or what they might be able to do to, bend those laws and get around them a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So the basic system in the United States has a lot less choice than actually a lot of other European countries, and even places like Quebec and Canada, where in other locations, in other countries, you don't have to go to a school just based on where you live. In the US, that's the norm, where you live in a particular residence and you are assigned to a government-run school just based on where you live. And if you want to go somewhere else, you have to pay for that school through the property tax system and through other tax streams as well. And we have compulsory education laws in all of the states in the US as well. So these schools that you're assigned to have enormous amounts of monopoly power because you have to pay for it. You're compelled to with compulsory education laws. And if you want to go somewhere else, you either have to move houses to gain access to another government-run school that you might think is a better option. Or if you want to send your kid to a private school, you have to pay out of pocket for tuition and fees, in addition to paying for the public school or government-run school, which comes to the tune of about $15,000 or $16,000 per student per year on average in the United States. Some places are more, some places are less, obviously. But you essentially have to pay twice if you want to access a private option. Same thing with homeschooling. You have to cover the cost of home-based education expenses and also just the time and the opportunity cost associated with switching to homeschooling as well, while still funneling all of those tax dollars to the school you aren't even using. I mean, just imagine if we forced low-income families using food stamps, for example, taxpayer-funded vouchers, essentially to shop at different locations. If we told them, you live here, you have to go to this government-run grocery store, get your government cheese, and you can only go there even if they're poisoning your food every day, even if the food is expired, or even if the shelves are empty, which we actually do see in socialist countries where the government runs the grocery industry. Well, with food stamps in the United States today, you could take that money to any provider that works for you, as long as it's an approved groceries. You're not spending it on beer, for example, or other non-food items. You have to spend it on food. So in the United States, we do just that. However, we say you live here, you got to go to the government-run school when it comes to K-12 education, and too bad if you want to go somewhere else. There are laws to change that. I just mentioned Arizona. They were the first or second state to go all in on what I call school choice, which is allowing that same funding to follow the child to whatever education provider works for them. So in Arizona, they have something called education savings accounts. This is kind of the new wave of school choice policy that's being introduced. And the funding that would follow the student to the government-run school in Arizona, if you want to take it there, you can. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school. Unlike how Obama was talking about doctors, you can actually keep your public school or government-run institution if you want to take the money there. But if not, in Arizona, you can take about half of the total funding. They spend about $14,000 or $15,000 per kid in the government institutions. You can take about $7,000 or $8,000 to a savings account directed by the parent, and you can spend it on private school tuition and fees, or you can take it to a charter school or home-based education option, including a micro school or to pay for homeschooling curriculum. You might ask, why is it not the full, $14,000 or $15,000? Well, because politics is messy, and in order to get a deal done, sometimes you have to take the incremental victory when you can. And it also is because K-12 education in the United States is funded typically by three sources: from the federal government, from the state government, and the local governments. Well, these school choice bills are typically passed at the state level, so it's typically the state funding that follows the student. In Arizona, that's about $7,000 or $8,000. What does that mean for the government schools? Well, they get to keep the local and federal dollars even after the student leaves. But yet you still have the teachers unions complaining that this is defunding the public schools, that they're going to collapse, that there's no way they can handle the competition. It's like, just imagine if you stopped shopping at Walmart, you started going to Trader Joe's or another provider, and Walmart got to keep half of your grocery funding each week. That wouldn't be a good idea, I don't think. I think it would be a great deal, however, for Walmart. This is similarly a great deal for the government-run schools, that they get to keep tons of the money, thousands of dollars per year for students they're no longer educating. So Arizona was the first state to do this, along with West Virginia. I think they're kind of tied for first place and second place. But since the past 2 years, we've already had 9 states enact these programs to have the funding follow the student. And they don't limit it to any income levels or certain types of students. They don't pick winners and losers. 9 states now, if I can name them, that would be great. We'll test my skills on this. But it's Arizona, West Virginia, Iowa, Arkansas, Utah, Florida, Indiana, Ohio, and Oklahoma. So that's 9 states in just 2 years have gone all in on school choice, allowing the funding to follow the student. And this is just a groundswell in support. There's been a poll that just recently came out from June 2023, finding 71% of Americans support this concept of school choice. And that support jumped 7 percentage points since April of 2020. What else happened in April of 2020? Well, the teachers unions kept the schools closed. Parents were not very happy with the school system at that time. And in June of 2022, June of 2023, we've done repeat polling showing that the support has soared since the pandemic. Families got to see the public schools or the government-run institutions weren't as great as they originally thought, especially when it comes to the fact that a lot of these schools are teaching kids about political ideology as opposed to the basics. Parents don't like that. That mobilized a lot of parents to push for these school choice bills at state capitals, and the school choice wave has really it's really gone a long way in a short amount of time. That's almost 20% of states going all in just 2 years. So the teachers unions monopoly is crumbling right before our very eyes. And it's actually their own fault, because they're the ones that lobbied the CDC to make it more difficult to reopen schools. They were threatening safety strikes, the teachers unions, in 2020. They were calling the president's plan to reopen schools in 2020 reckless, callous, and cruel. They were doing everything they could. They were even deleting tweets that they had put out saying that it was the push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny. I mean, they did whatever they could to keep the schools closed. I mean, it was absolutely, they overplayed their hand, and it became apparent to everybody that the school system is not responsive to the needs of their customers, because they're not really customers if you don't have competition. They're more like a captive audience, and they know it. But parents know it too now, and they're pushing back at the polls and the ballot box.
So this idea of a teachers union, how long has that been a thing? What's the history of the teachers union, and how was it formed? Why was it formed? How long has it been going? What do they push for?
I mean, the teachers union's been around for several decades. We've had the Department of Education in the U.S. since, I want to say, 1981. That was really created at the federal level as a deal, as a payoff to the teachers unions. And the teachers unions are really just an extension or an arm of the Democratic Party. I mean, you look at the Open Secrets website where you can look at campaign contributions and who certain organizations give to. Well, you look at Randy Weingarten's union, the American Federation of Teachers, one of the biggest teachers unions at the national level in the United States, one of the biggest labor unions in general in the United States. And they have data back to 1990. So this is, over 3 decades worth of data. In every single election cycle, AFT, the teachers union, donated at least 97% of their campaign contributions, which are indirectly funded by the taxpayer, because again, the taxpayer's paying for the government schools. The government school system is paying for the teachers' salaries and their benefits, partially, which go to the teachers union dues that then go back to the Democratic Party. It's a whole money laundering operation that a lot of people haven't really figured out yet, but once they do, it really upsets them. But over 90% of that funding in each cycle for over 3 decades that we have data have gone to Democrats as opposed to Republicans. And so it makes it really difficult for Democrats in office who are controlled by the teachers unions to vote for school choice policies, because that threatens the teachers union monopoly. So you have so much hypocrisy on full display each and every day. I tweet about this all the time, where you have people who went to private school themselves, send their kids to private school, and then vote against school choice for lower income families. Joe Biden did this. Nancy Pelosi in California, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, Roy Cooper, the governor of North Carolina, who currently is calling a state of emergency over school choice. You'd think he'd call a state of emergency over the failing school scores in the government-run school system. How they're spending so much money and getting zero in terms of results. But no, he calls a state of emergency because his special interest donors, the teachers unions, are threatened by competition with the school choice bill that has a very high likelihood of passing with veto override majorities in North Carolina. But since the Democratic Party is so owned by the teachers unions, even though Democratic voters of all backgrounds, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, the poll that just came out in June of 2023 found supermajority support among Republicans, Democrats, and independent voters in America for school choice. But when you look at state legislatures, you have the Republicans typically voting for it and the Democrats voting against it, not because of logic. I mean, the Democrats should support school choice. It's an equalizer. Republicans support it as well. Obviously, they vote for it. Democrats send their own kids to private school in large numbers, particularly politicians. But then they, time and time again, vote in opposition, not because of logic. I mean, just think about it. Democrats very are usually in support of other policies that fund people directly and allow people to choose. Think about food stamps. You can take that money to any private grocery store you want. You think about pre-K programs. For pre-K programs like Head Start, you can choose a private provider of pre-K, and it can even be a religious provider of pre-K, and Democrats support Head Start. You think about once you graduate from high school, once you get to college, we have Pell Grants for low-income students. You can take those scholarships to a public university if you want, but you could also take that funding to a private, even a religious university. And Democrats support those type of policies as well, but only when it comes to K through 12 education. They support it for pre-K. They support it for higher ed. They don't support it for K through 12 only because choice is the norm for higher ed, pre-K, and everything else. But choice threatens an entrenched special interest, the teachers unions, only when it comes to K through 12 education. So of course, they fight as hard as possible against allowing the funding to follow the student. But voters need to really realize this. There's just so much hypocrisy on full display, and we should really disband the teachers unions. If we don't, or we could just expand school choice to make them more accountable. If there was at least bottom up accountability where parents can vote with their feet freely and take the money with them, well, the government schools and the teachers unions who control them would have at least a little bit of an incentive to do a better job. And we've seen that time and time again as well, that there are 29 studies on the subject, and 26 to 29 of those studies find statistically significant positive effects of private school choice competition, allowing the money to follow the child, on the outcomes in the government schools too. So school choice is even a rising tide that lifts all boats. Even for the government schools, they can actually do a better job if there's enough pressure.
Man, what a rip. Okay. And today I was just reading through, I pick it up time to time and reread some pages of John Taylor Gatto's book, Underground History of American Education. And I'm glad you brought up this, because I read this part today and for whatever reason, it just stuck with me. And I'm now going to read it back to you. And what you were talking about, like how weird it is that those people in charge will send their kids to private school, but they will not vote for the right for school choice for the others, right? And this is from a National Education Association National Convention in 1908, which Gatto writes about. And the speaker was James Russell of Bertrand Russell family as well. And he goes on to say, how can a nation endure that deliberately seeks to rouse ambitions and aspirations in the oncoming generations, which cannot possibly be fulfilled? So basically saying, why give these people hope when they are not one of us? Right? How can we justify our practice in schooling the masses in precisely the same manner as we do those who are to be leaders? Again, saying, right? Go ahead. You want to go.
That's
right.
it. I mean, they're trying to defend the hypocrisy, right? And it's all about we're better than them. We can choose for our kids. I think Horace Mann actually homeschooled his own kid. Yeah, right. He was the major proponent, the father of public education, supporting compulsory government schooling for everybody else's kids. Why? Because he's so smart. I think he had a PhD and he could figure it out for his kids, apparently. But the masses, we got to have them go to the government schools to learn in ways that I would homeschool my own kid, right? So, and he knows he knows the people who would control that system to raise other people's kids in ways that align with his values, as opposed to those masses who couldn't actually, they can never figure out how to educate their own kids. And you see some of this today. Some of these Democrats who vote against school choice and then send their own kids to private school, they'll try to defend themselves in a couple of ways. One is they'll say, well, I paid for it. I paid out of pocket. It's like, okay, yeah, you're wealthy enough to be able to do that. But you should also remember that taxpayers are already paying for the government schools, and parents are taxpayers too. And that money's meant for educating their kid. It doesn't belong to the government institutions. They should be able to take that to a private school too. And oh, by the way, didn't you just vote Democrat for those policies that give taxpayer money to low-income families for everything else? But now that it comes to K-12 education, in order to defend your hypocrisy, you're going to adopt this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, but only when it comes to K-12 education. It's just total logical inconsistency, hypocrisy on full display. And it's all because they're owned by the teachers unions. Politicians respond to power as opposed to what's right and as opposed to logic. Hopefully some politicians are seeing that parents are powerful too, and they have a new union, the kids union, and they're pushing back at the ballot box as well. And parents outnumber teachers. If parents band together, they can affect a change to a large degree, more so than the teachers unions, and they care about their kids more than anybody else. And so another defense is that you'll hear this this elitist argument that they say the quiet part out loud. And I love it when they do this, because it really backfires. It just blows up in their face. And this happened in 2021, I want to say, in Kentucky. They actually succeeded in passing a school choice program in 2021, which we at the time called 2021 the year of school choice, because we had the most victories ever. Now in 2023, we've actually had even bigger victories than 2021. So the momentum just keeps going in our favor towards education freedom as the years go on. I mean, it's becoming politically profitable or advantageous to support parental rights in education, and it's becoming a form of political suicide to come out against parents and their right to direct their kids' education at this time in 2023. But this Kentucky Democrat representative on the House floor, they were talking about a Virginia school choice program. They said, oh yeah, they're doing this in Virginia. It's open to like higher income families and they're shopping around for the kids' education. And they said, well, this program here in Kentucky would be a little different. We're trying to say that low income families should be able to shop around for their education. And she was saying it in terms of like, oh, there's no way those low income families can figure out how to shop around for their education. It's like, low income families also care about their kids' needs, and they know their children's educational needs far more than bureaucrats sitting in offices hundreds of miles away. So they should be able to choose as well. So that really blew up in that representative's face. There was another one in Arizona. I don't think it was a representative. It was a member of the public just testifying against school choice. And she said something along the lines of, we expect that we're going to allow low-income families to choose. You know what happens when low-income families get a choice, and basically saying like they'll mess it up. They can't figure it out. And again, no, it's parents who know far more than bureaucrats sitting in offices hundreds of miles away for their own kids. So the representatives don't even know their kid's name. How are they going to figure out the best education for their kids? And then it's really about parental rights. I mean, you can say that these parents don't have the capability of choosing, but who's the one determining that? Yeah, maybe they don't choose the woke schools that you would choose to send your own kids to, but maybe they want a school that focuses on the basics or has conservative values, and you may not like that. I think that's the bigger issue. They don't want parents to choose schools where they aren't indoctrinated in leftist values. I think that's the major problem for a lot of these representatives. But yeah, I mean, it's nonstop hypocrisy. It's nonstop logical inconsistency. And it's why the dam is breaking. It's why school choice victories are going to continue going forward. I don't think there's any stopping it.
And those families that do decide to send their kids to the private schools, I mean, these are very, very expensive, and you're still paying your state taxes as well on top of that anyway. And generally, the private schools, they're still following the same curriculum, right? Or agenda, as I like to call it. So, and these, yeah, go on.
So, I mean, some private schools do also have woke curriculum, right? That parents don't like. But at least when you have a choice, the argument for school choice isn't that all private schools are better than all government schools, or that, homeschooling is always better than private and government schools. The point is that it's going to depend on the individual family and the individual kid. There are families who have one kid going to homeschooling, one kid doing private, one kid going to a charter school. And it all depends on the individual needs and interests and desires of that individual child. And so the one-size-fits-all government school system totally assumes that all kids are like widgets that can just fit into a box. And they're all going to learn the same way because there's this one best way to do so. And they're all going to be interested in what you want them to be interested in at this time of day, at this level. And it's a system that's set up for failure from the get-go. And so I don't really blame the teachers all that much, right? Because a lot of the teachers are doing their best in the school system, and they're in the system that is set up for failure. So it's not a lot of their own faults. I mean, I think it's the teachers' union's fault, which is not the same thing as the individual members, because the teachers' unions push for policies that are anti-student. I mean, the NEA that you just referenced, that quote from 1908, fast forward to 2019, they actually voted down a resolution a few years ago in 2019 that was pretty basic. It said something along the lines, the NEA will realign itself to be focused on student learning. That's going to be the point of our organization. They voted it down. They defeated that motion to make their organization about student learning. Why? They're a teachers union, not a kids union. They're not, I mean, it shouldn't surprise us that the teachers unions are pushing for policies that trap kids in their failing schools and also try to make the work as easy as possible for the employees and try to just push for more and more money from the taxpayer. They're not in it for the taxpayer or the kids. They're in it for their members, and they don't even actually take care of their members all that well because they also operate in a monopolistic system where the money goes towards, Randy Weingarten, who makes over $500,000 a year. Yet, since I gave you a statistic earlier, since 1970, we've increased per student education expenditures in real terms by 152%. But teacher salaries in real terms, after adjusting for inflation, have only increased by 8%. What do the teachers unions consistently push for? They did this during the COVID period too. They push for more people, just hire more people, because then they can have a bigger voting bloc to elect more Democratic politicians. And then they could also have more people, which means more dues paying members. If you want to put that money towards higher salaries, you're not going to get more union dues. But if you put more people into the buildings, you get a lot more union revenues that you can then funnel back to the Democratic Party. Again, it's a money laundering operation, not an education initiative. And it's really made the school system itself more of a jobs program for adults than an education initiative for kids. And it's pretty disgraceful. Hopefully more people figure these things out. And I think they are. That's why we've had almost 20% of states unleashing education freedom for all in just 2 years.
So the people that run this teachers union, have they ever been teachers themselves, or are they just monopolist kind of business people that are taking advantage of the good-natured will of the teachers who are paying their dues because they feel as though they're going to be protected?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? Like a lot of people in the teachers, I mean, the members are teachers currently, but the leaders of the teachers union, like Randy Weingarten, she had been a teacher at some point, but it's not like she's currently an educator. She's turned this into her life job. And I think for the most part, she's been a union boss as opposed to an educator in the classroom. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there too. But yeah, I mean, you just look at the policy track record. The teachers are consistently having to pay out of pocket for supplies each year. And it's not because the system doesn't have money. I mean, we throw so much money into that money pit, but it doesn't actually go to the classroom. I mean, teachers have classrooms of 20, 30, 40 students. Kids are getting, 15,000 per year. Multiply that out. If the teachers are only getting paid 60,000 on average in the U.S., according to the latest data that I've seen, where's the rest of the money going? It's going towards administrative bloat and these staffing surges. They're putting a lot of non-teachers into the buildings just to amp up the union revenues overall that go back to the Democratic Party.
God, it's a mess. So how do you reach the teachers that are currently paying their dues, that think they're being protected and have no idea what they're actually contributing to?
That's a good question. I'm actually in Denver right now. If you couldn't tell, my background's a little different today. And I'm at something called the Teacher Freedom Summit. It's put on by the Freedom Foundation. And I like to think of it as kind of like, that group Moms for Liberty that recently formed. It's a bunch of parents who get together. They push back at the school board meeting. They lobby for policies that are pro-parent. And so Moms for Liberty has been a good model for other interest groups. And now it's kind of like I see this Teachers for Liberty that's forming at this conference, where teachers who are in the public school system would usually be afraid to speak out. But if you have a whole group together and you can coordinate together, and it's not just you being the only one to stick your neck out, you're more likely to say something because you have people who have your back. And so there's this, Teachers for Liberty kind of movement happening right now here in Denver. And, you can convince them to leave the union, particularly now. In 2018, a lot of people don't know this. There was a Supreme Court decision called Janus. And the impetus behind the case, or the ruling, basically says that you can no longer compel public sector employees to pay union dues. So basically, every state in the country is now a right to work state. You can't force public sector employees to pay the union dues now. And the reason for that was it was an infringement on their First Amendment. You think about the teachers unions at the national level right now. look at Randy Weingarten's Twitter account at AFT. It's all anti-conservative nonsense that has nothing to do with getting a better education for kids or even improving the working conditions of teachers. It's all political. And so the case basically says that compelling public sector employees to pay these national unions are infringing on their First Amendment right because they're funding political speech that they disagree with. And look, a lot of these unions, they lobbied the CDC to make the schools closed. They, in some cases, they actually, in Los Angeles, for example, in their supposed report on reopening schools safely, they included all these unrelated demands to open the school. Of course, they wanted more money, but they also called for Medicare for all, a wealth tax. They wanted police-free schools. Other unions called for rent cancellation, benefits for immigrants. I mean, it was all just unrelated political nonsense in order to reopen the schools safely. What did any of that have to do with reopening schools safely? Nothing. It was that they had their wish list of democratic priorities that they wanted, and they snuck that into their demands to reopen the schools. And that's another reason why parents were like, what in the heck is going on here? I thought this was supposed to be a system for educating kids. No, it has been taken over by leftist infiltration, and it really just became on full display starting in March and April of 2020. So, you can email a lot of the members don't actually know about the Janus decision that happened, now 5 years ago. So there are organizations like Freedom Foundation who provide this information to the members. The more that's likely to reduce the number of teachers who stay in the union. A lot of the times, one of the main pushbacks of even if they disagree with the political speech of the union bosses and really making them look bad. I mean, Randy Weingarten makes the whole profession look pretty bad because a lot of teachers are conservatives, and they're not really being represented at a national level. In that you would think, based on Randy Weingarten's tweets, that 99% of them are Marxist. That's not actually the case. But the main pushback you'll hear from the individual members is, well, what if something happens at the school, and I need some type of liability insurance for whatever happened at the school. And the union dues partially paid for that. Well, there are private organizations that provide this liability insurance. So just informing them of other options that are available too. They'll say, okay, yeah, I'll take that money I would have paid to the government teachers unions, and I'll give it to this liability insurance instead. That's all I really need. And then, that can lead to a reduction in dues paying members. And I think the national unions have seen a pretty significant reduction in membership, or at least a reduction in the growth of membership over the past few years too.
Do you know how much they are, the dues? How much are people paying per month or per year?
I'm not quite sure what the average union dues are. I bet you Freedom Foundation, if you look up their website, would have that information available.
Right. Man, what a racket. And this all goes back to, this is all built on the foundations of the GEB, right? The General Education Board that was founded back in the early 1900s.
Yeah, well, I don't remember the history of the GEB back in the 1900s, but I'm sure John Taylor Gatto gave a little bit of a background.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he lifted the lid on that. And lo and behold, Rockefeller was the main funder of that. And he hired Frederick Gates, I think is the name, if I'm not mistaken, to run that and, start infiltrating the schools, how they're run, what they teach, how they teach, when they teach it. Yeah.
Yeah, but look, the lid is being blown off on it now today as well, which is great. This is the silver lining of COVID. A lot of parents who thought their kids were in great public schools, maybe they were A-rated by the state, or maybe the kids just had good scores when they came home on their report card or on the standardized test. those same parents started to see something else was going on. There's another dimension of school quality that's more important than test scores, which happens to be whether the curriculum aligns with the family's values. Parents don't want to send their kids to institutions that are brainwashing them for 13 years. So that the jig is up when it comes to this infiltration from the left, and it's becoming a political winner to support school choice and parental rights as well. In fact, last year in 2022, in the midterms, 76% of the candidates supported by my organization, the American Federation for Children, and our state affiliates won their races in 2022. So I like to say there wasn't a red wave, there wasn't a blue wave, but there was a school choice wave. School choice candidates won in large numbers in 2022. And this year, we already had elections in Virginia in 2023, and we endorsed, I want to say, 8 candidates, and 7 of them won their primaries as well. So it's also becoming a litmus test issue for Republicans to support school choice, especially when a lot of the voters are seeing that the teachers unions who own the Democrats who oppose school choice are also supporters of things like Planned Parenthood and all these other leftist agenda items. And so school choice and parental rights has become a huge political winner for Republicans and a litmus test issue in the Republican primaries as well. In Tennessee, for example, last year, they had, in the House primaries for the Republicans, they had 10 candidates who were endorsed by the teachers unions, and 9 of them lost. And as far as those, so this has become a line in the sand issue for Republicans. And last year, out of those, we engaged in hundreds of races from the American Federation for Children. And we didn't just play in the easy races to get to that 76% victory number. Because, if you're just defending incumbents, for example, people who are already in office, that's an easier race than to challenge an incumbent and to unseat a sitting legislator. It's really hard to do. It's actually the hardest thing to do in politics. And we targeted 69 incumbents at the state level in state legislatures. And we took out 40 of them, which is the toughest thing to do in politics. And it was very good numbers for incumbent challenges. It's also why I think school choice is going to continue to expand, especially in red states where it's become a litmus test issue and it's become a political winner. Hopefully in blue states, we can get it done as well. It's been very difficult to do in blue states for the obvious reason. But some Democrats are starting to defect on the issue. We had in North Carolina this year, Tricia Cotham, a Democrat representative in the House in North Carolina, switched parties to the GOP after coming out and supported school choice. The Democratic Party disowned her because they're owned by the teachers unions. And just in June of 2023, a Democrat representative who voted for a school choice bill this year, Misha Maynor in Georgia, switched parties just this month to the Republican Party because of the issue of school choice. There was a quote by Misha Maynor in Fox News recently saying something along the lines of, the Democratic Party really abandoned her because of her support for school choice. There's only so long that the Democratic Party can keep this up. I mean, school choice is so popular among voters, and they're actually losing voters over the issue, but they're also losing their own sitting legislators over the issue who are switching parties towards the GOP because of support for school choice.
And I saw something come across my Twitter thread the other day, and I'm sure I'm going to mess it up. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was at the White House. Biden and the First Lady, they had the Teacher of the Year there or something. And I want to say the line was something along the lines of, we must remember they're the nation's children, not the families, or something.
This has been said a few times this year, and it's surprising to me that more people haven't had an uproar about it. But Joe Biden's Twitter account, and they're saying this out loud, they're saying, we've called them socialist and communist for a long time. They're just out and saying it now. They have this, the modern day Democratic Party has run so far left that their moderate position is that the kids belong to the government, not the parents. That is totally what a decade ago we would have said is just so extremely far left Marxist. That has become the modern day platform of the Democratic Party. If you look at the president of the United States, Joe Biden, who is tweeting out things along the lines of, there's no such thing as other people's children. They're all our children. No, they're not. Stop right there. These are the parents' children, and they're in the best position to dictate or to determine the best education future for their own kids. The kids don't belong to the village, especially the village we live in today. I don't want my kids to be part of that village. I want to determine what the village looks like. You don't get to determine how I raise my children.
And I remember
I mean, we're seeing lots of quotes like that come out. There was also the Michigan Democratic Party. I want to hit this real quick. The Michigan Democratic Party last year did something similar where they put out a post and they said, they're making fun of the concept of parental rights. And they were saying that it was a similar kind of thing that, we all have an interest in shaping the mind. It takes a village post.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up deleting it and saying, these aren't the actual views of the Michigan Democratic Party. But wait, you posted it on Facebook from your verified Michigan Democratic Party account. How are you going to say this isn't your actual views or position? You only deleted it and backtracked and backpedaled after you got so much pushback in the media and on social media that you had to spin it some way. And so, of course, they did the whole, this wasn't actually how we felt. Yes, you did. You didn't change your tune until you got huge pushback. In, I want to say North Carolina, there was a Democratic Party at the county level who tweeted out a cartoon that depicted parents at school board meetings as serial killers and monsters. Like, really? Bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how well that works out for them. It didn't really work out for them in the elections in North Carolina. But in Virginia, too, Terry McAuliffe, he was a former governor running for governor again, basically an incumbent in Virginia. He was in a state in Virginia that went 10 points to Biden in 2020, just the year before. He actually, on the debate stage, the final debate, he said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. In a state that closed down the schools more than just about any other state in Virginia, and in a blue state, he ended up losing to Glenn Youngkin, a Republican who ran on parental rights as a political winner. He won with education voters, Glenn Youngkin, by 6 points, and that was the number 2 issue in that election, which is huge. And it just goes to show you, if politicians talk about education reform and parental rights enough, whereas for the most part, the jobs in the economy are at the top and crime and stuff like that. And education tends to rank very low on the list of priorities of voters as to why they're going to vote for this person or that person. According to Washington Post exit polling in Virginia, education was the number 2 issue. So if politicians want to make it an issue, they can. And that really depends on the GOP becoming the parents' party and pushing back against the teachers' unions. Because if they stay silent about the issue, there isn't going to be a battle and it'll rank lower on the list of priorities.
I should have asked you to clarify what the GOP is for the global listeners. What is that?
The Grand Old Party is the nickname for the Republican Party.
Okay.
Just the Republican Party. If any time during this episode you heard me say GOP, I meant Republican Party.
All right. Got it. Okay. And I do remember as well, way back, this could have been probably around 2021. And in a response to the boom in homeschooling, and I don't know her name, but she's either the head or the dean of Harvard, came out and basically said something along the lines to what Biden said, along the lines of, you have no rights to be teaching your own children. They need to be in an education system. Really, you could see, it's like the classic meme, like Starship Troopers, like they're afraid. They can feel it slipping from them.
Yeah, I wrote an article I wrote a few on this, and I don't remember which ones had this title, but the title was "Elites Go to War on Homeschooling, just as everybody's doing it."
Yeah.
And the reason I wrote this is because the Harvard professor you're referring to is the name of Dr. Elizabeth Bartlett.
That's right.
And she wrote an 90-page report in a law review journal making the case that we should have what she called a presumptive ban on homeschooling. Yep. It was really just a ban on homeschooling. But her case was, well, if you really want to homeschool, maybe you can do it for some time of the day, but you got to always send your kid to the government schools, at least for some of the day. But if you want to get them away from that institution for a little bit, you can still homeschool to some degree if you can prove to us that you are fit and able to do so. I mean, that is a huge infringement on individual liberties. And who gets to determine whether you're fit to homeschool? Obviously, you'll have people in charge saying, oh, you don't have CRT curriculum. You don't have this leftist indoctrination in your house. Well, that's not going to work, and you're not fit to educate your kids at home. And you want to focus on the basics? No way, you can't do that. So I don't trust the government to determine who is fit to educate their own kids. But her whole argument was based on outliers. And what I think really happened was she had this long report written up, probably before COVID closed and the school closures happened and everybody started homeschooling. And she was, academics, they don't, a lot of the times they don't really have a good sense of comm strategy, I would say, communication strategy, and how people are going to receive a message. They just, they go and they write these long articles and they just send it out into the world and see what happens. I think that's what happened here. And she wasn't going to sit on this until COVID was over and she was going to let it out. And so it came out, and it was just so ill timed that, wait, you're going to call it to ban homeschooling just as everybody's basically forced to do so right now. Obviously, your idea is a bunch of BS. I think Germany is probably the only state that still bans homeschooling with criminal punishments. And Germany was also had to kind of get around that during COVID as well. It's like you had these laws on the books that are basically no good. Look, everybody's doing it. But basically, Elizabeth Bartholet's entire argument was based on outliers. She would point in her 90-page journal article that she would point to, it could be the case that sometimes parents abuse their kids, which is a huge tragedy. We shouldn't downplay abuse of children. But she was using the outliers that it does happen, and it's a real problem. And I believe, the rest of society should step in if there is evidence of that happening. But she was saying from the get-go, well, it might happen, so we shouldn't let anybody do that because it might happen. My quick response was, well, based on your own logic, there's abuse in the government schools. A Department of Education report in 2000 and it's a pretty old report. I don't remember the exact year, but they estimated, the Department of Ed in the United States, that 1 out of every 10 kids would experience educator sexual misconduct by the time they graduate high school. That's just from from educators. And so based on her own logic that this could happen sometimes, well, I guess we got to abolish all the government schools because it could happen. And of course, that she wasn't bringing that same energy to the policies that she liked, just she didn't like homeschooling, and she was arguing that against homeschooling. She was saying, oh, some homeschool parents might not do a good job at educating their kids, and maybe they won't be proficient in math or reading. Who wants to tell her about the proficiency rates in math and reading in the government schools? Guess we got to destroy all the government schools, since some of them don't, a lot of them actually don't proficiently educate kids to a proficient level in math or reading. So that was her entire argument, and it was just, it fell apart into pieces. And if you looked at her article and you looked up the words sometimes, like some or many times, I think I found, I don't remember how many times it was mentioned, but it was like hundreds of times. So it just goes to show you everything was speculation, that it could happen here. Sometimes it happens, many times. It's like, okay, well, how many times? Is it actually like 90% of the time that this is happening, or is it really just like 0.1% of the time and you're trying to make it a bigger issue than it actually is? I mean, and it's kind of like an infringement on the Fourth Amendment. She was basically saying, well, it could happen. If you're not doing anything wrong, you should have nothing to worry about. That's like saying, well, we should have no-knock raids into people's houses because, well, if you're not hiding any weapons or any drugs in your house, you should have nothing to worry about. So you shouldn't have a right to privacy in your own home. We should just have cops come and check your house every week. I mean, it's basically the argument that she's making. And you can apply it to food too. Some parents might not feed their kids appropriately, so we got to assign everybody to government grocery stores, and those government attendants or employees at those grocery stores, they're going to feed your kids under their supervision, not your own. Or we got to have the government come into your house each day and to watch you guys eat dinner because you might not do a good job or feed the kids in the way that we would feed them. It's just a huge infringement on individual liberty. And that's the basis of the argument by Elizabeth Bartholet from Harvard. It didn't last long. I mean, she was, I think they had actually set up a conference on their anti-homeschooling agenda at Harvard, and they ended up canceling it after a bunch of pushback.
Right. And they are afraid because they're afraid that they lose their minds, right? Because as soon as the people aren't coming to school, they're learning the stuff they want to learn that interests them. And you'd have a boon in entrepreneurial pursuits. But they're also, and back to one of your points earlier in the show, in the conversation, you were talking about every American has to go to the same school and is paying that tax and is, in the address. And this is all a form of surveillance, right? They don't want you off the reservation. And this goes back again to the work of Taylor Gatto. And I think it was John Dewey that spent some time out in China and realized they call it the Dangan system. By that, it was the Dangan, a continuous, lifelong personal file exposing every student's intimate life history from birth through school and onwards. It's a machine, man. Like, it's a total psyop, surveillance, mind control machine. And the teachers are trapped in that too. I want to make, both you and I agree with this. I believe the teacher's just as trapped as the student. If you take someone well-natured who wants to mentor kids, and then I think it's the most disgusting thing to be able to change them and use them as a puppet for the agendas that you are trying to, force down through them.
Yeah, the government school system is a monopoly in the market for goods and services, but it's also a monopsony with monopolistic properties in the market for labor, in the labor market.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because if you want to go into teaching, you basically only 10% of the market is private schools and 90% in government, the public school system. So basically, you got to accept the benefits in terms of job security, pay, and autonomy that's granted to you in the government school system. And there's not much else you could do. And because the government schools don't have a lot of pressure from the bottom up from consumers, well, they don't have a strong incentive to put that money towards the teachers to lead to better outcomes in the government school system for the kids, which ultimately hurts the teachers too. I mean, there's multiple reasons why the school system is bad for kids, but also the teachers at the same time. As I said earlier, pour more money into it. The teachers aren't seeing in their salaries. The teachers union bosses are. Randy Weingarten makes over $500,000 a year. And that just means more people in the system. Again, they spend the money on, they did this with COVID money too. In Los Angeles, the latest data that I've seen from, I think it was like a 2022 budget in Los Angeles, they were showing their planned budget a 69% increase since 2019 to 2022 in per student education expenditures, making it at about a planned $26,000 per student in the Los Angeles public school system in LA Unified. And they were planning to spend that additional, so they were, mind you, they were losing 6% of their student population at that time. So they're losing 6% of their customer base. They're getting 69% more per student at the same time over a 2-year period. And they were planning to increase the number of psychological social workers by about 80%, and the numbers of principals and assistant principals by a huge number as well. So they were just planning to put more and more people into the building, knowing that this federal COVID money was going to dry up. Why did they do that? Because they know if they hire a bunch of new people with the money that's going to dry up over time, well, when that money does dry up over the next decade or so, they'll say, look, we have all these people with jobs. And if you don't increase federal education spending by 60%, well, you're going to fire all these people. And how dare you? That's a bad move, politician, to fire all these people. It's like, you knew this was going to happen. And so they're so nefarious. They're doing this on purpose, hiring people knowing the money's going to run out because they know they'll be able to use that as leverage to get more money later. It's it's a total disaster. But again, the only solution is not going to be within the system. It has to be through pressuring that system to change, and by allowing families to redirect that money somewhere else. And then, only then, will they have an incentive to actually listen to families and their kids.
And this is what we talk about all the time. When we're in the Bitcoin space, we talk about fiat money versus Bitcoin, and the fiat incentives that drive people's behavior and intentions. And that you just described it perfect. What's going on? You dangle that fiat money over people, and they know it's going to run out, so they're going to pull out all the stops to get as much as they can. And what does that result in? Bad behavior, bad ethics, bad morals, kids getting crushed, teachers getting crushed, and it's just, I mean, the whole thing is just so, well, it's not broken. It's working exactly as designed. But I want to know, how the hell did you find yourself fighting this fight, man? Like, what's your backstory? Because like you said at the beginning, you just got married, you're planning to have your own family. It's not like, you got burned, one of your kids,
Right.
you saw it with your own eyes. No. So where? How?
I did get burned. I had to suffer through the government school system from
Yeah, we all got
so
burned.
that way, actually, I did okay. I did a good job at this in the school system. I got all A's every year. I had a great GP. I was really good at memorizing things, so I was actually really well equipped to get through the government school system that has you regurgitate information year after year, but that doesn't actually teach you real life skills. But no, I actually had the opportunity to attend something in high school that is still run by the government, but at least it's a form of school choice called a magnet school. A lot of states have these. They're kind of like charter schools, but they can have admissions standards, and they can have their own specialized mission. Mine was a communications specialized school, and it was actually on the physical campus of my residentially assigned government school, which was not a great institution. I saw a night and day difference in academics and of the two schools day after day for 4 years straight. I was actually able to play sports at the government-run assigned school, which was a great benefit too. But as far as academics were concerned, I had this magnet school opportunity. So I think other families should also be able to have more choice in education, like I had in high school, at least, which had a good impact on my life. It does have good impacts for other families too, to have more choice, but it shouldn't be limited to schools that are run by the government. I had a really weak sauce form of school choice that I benefited from, in that at least I wasn't assigned to it, and at least I could pick this specialized school. But I should be able to have that money that is meant for educating me or my children also follow me to a private school, a charter school, or a home-based education option like a micro school. The funding should follow the decision of the family. So that was a good experience for me and really introduced me to the school choice world, I would say. But I really got into this space more recently as a researcher. I did my PhD in education policy at the University of Arkansas. So I'm not a real doctor, but I'm kind of like a Jill Biden doctor. I have a PhD in education policy. I can't help you with medical stuff. Jill Biden has an education doctorate, an EdD. But no, I studied the effects of these school choice programs. My first study looking at the effects of the Milwaukee parental choice program, the school choice program that had started in Milwaukee. It's been there for over 3 decades now. In 1990, we had student level data from the state, the longitudinal evaluation of that program. And we had, identifiers, first name, last name, date of birth. And in Wisconsin, as a libertarian, I don't like this. It's really weird, actually. If you have those 3 key pieces of information, first name, last name, date of birth, you can look up any adult's criminal records in the state of Wisconsin from 18 onward. And so, as a libertarian with concerns about personal privacy and the government not storing your information, didn't like it very much, but the information was already out there. And as a researcher, it was really beneficial. Most of these studies look at the effects on test scores because why? Test scores are readily available, and they're available over time for every student, and you can link certain program interventions to test scores. But that's not because test scores are overly important or that people really like standardized testing. It's just researchers need data, particularly economists, and they want to link things to different data. And so they look at test scores all the time. Well, with this 3 key pieces of information in the state of Wisconsin, we were able to link kids to their criminal records by the time that they were about 25 to 30 years of age. And we found that using the program to attend a private school was associated with a huge reduction in certain types of crimes relative to the kids who didn't have access to those schools, who were stuck in the residentially assigned government-run school options in Milwaukee. And so that thrust me into the national conversation. It was a huge, a huge study that a lot of people aren't able to look at these long-term outcomes. And so that was my first report. I'd also done a follow-up study following those same students a little later, looked at the effects of that program on voting behaviors. Where I was able to look at how private schooling and other access to choice options improved political participation. We also found a reduction in paternity disputes, which could be caused by teenage pregnancies, which are more likely to happen in the government school system. There's another study in New York City, published in the Journal of Political Economy. They used a random lottery to determine, who gets access to the charter school, who has to stay in the government school, and it kind of sets up like a randomized control trial, like a medical trial. And they compared who won the lottery to go to a charter school to those who lost. They had a big enough sample size to make causal claims, and they actually found that winning the lottery was associated with a complete elimination, 100% reduction in the likelihood of incarceration for male students by the end of the study period. For female students, they found a 59% reduction in the likelihood of a report of teenage pregnancy. And that kind of connects to our study, finding a reduction in paternity disputes that could result from those teenage pregnancies. So I was just looking at all sorts of these different longer-term outcomes, mental health, and I also looked at the negative effects of regulating these programs as well, infringing on the amounts of choices that parents could have, how it could actually have unintended consequences on the effectiveness of those programs. And I started to find, I published a lot of peer-reviewed articles. I think I'm currently sitting around 40 peer-reviewed journal articles. And that's, having peers who are not my peers. They are more like my enemies. They are mostly Marxists who hate school choice, who will do whatever they can to say that a study is not legitimate, to downplay the results, and to say it's not causal when they approve other studies that are much lower quality in the same journal. And I was still able to publish, but I figured out real quick, like, why am I trying to impress these people who clearly don't like me? I could be rewarded for my ideas instead of punished in a different job. So I went into the think tank world. I started at the Cato Institute, went to Reason Foundation, and I'm now at the American Federation for Children. I'm still affiliated with Cato and Reason, both great organizations, and I'm also at the Educational Freedom Institute as the executive director there. But yeah, I really switched from the academic world to more towards advocacy, and I still do studies from time to time, not as much as I did before, but a lot of communications and more focused on political activity than I was before.
Matt, and your memory, mate. Like you said, no wonder you did well at school. If you could just remember the amount of statistics you pulled out of your brain just in this conversation is absolutely amazing. So, what next? What's the vision? Where are we going?
Yeah, so we're already starting the what's next, right? 9 states going all in on school choice in 2 years. Well, the goal is to get to 50 states. So we're not even halfway there yet. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. I will say all the states that have done this in the past 2 years have been controlled by the Republican Party. They've had GOP trifectas, Republican governors, Republican House and Senate in each state. There have been other incremental victories, and this has happened over time too. The Milwaukee program. Since the 1990s, for decades, we've had little incremental progress on school choice. We've had little programs that are for lower income families. We've had some programs for special needs kids. We've had programs in Maine and Vermont in the 1800s, actually. They passed one of these programs in each state called town tuitioning programs. I would say that are the oldest voucher programs in the country in the late 1800s. And the way that you were eligible for a voucher was that if you lived in a place that did not have a public school, usually rural areas, they didn't have any public schools. And so the government, the state, would just give them a check, a voucher, to pay for another public school nearby in another district, or they could pay for private school tuition and fees. So it was a very kind of basic form of school choice a long time ago, but it was only if you were in those areas that didn't have public schools. So it's still limited. Now we're seeing a different kind of push. It's more towards the concept of universal. We're not picking winners and losers anymore. These are big advancements, not these tiny incremental steps along the way. It's just going from 0 to 100 real quick, and everybody's becoming eligible, regardless of income and regardless of background, regardless of zip code. All families are already getting a funded education by the taxpayer. If we're going to fund it, that money should at least go to the parents to decide, and it shouldn't. And these programs that just focus on low income, for example, well, higher income families pay taxes too. And in fact, they probably pay more into their taxes than the lower income families. They should at least get the same amount in terms of a voucher to pay for a private or home-based education option. So I think the next step forward is to get more red states to go all in on school choice, Republican-controlled states. That's the easier path towards victory at the moment because it's on the Republican Party platform. Republican voters and Democratic voters and independents alike support school choice, but Republicans have the highest level of support for school choice policies. And the more that the red state government school monopoly dominoes continue to fall, I think the blue states are going to have to come along at one point. They'll either, the Democrats in those blue states will either lose on the topic at the ballot box, and those blue states will become red states, and then we'll pass school choice. Or what I'm hoping is that more of the blue states start to say, and Democratic politicians start to say, you know what? We can't keep fighting parental rights forever. There's only so long that we can keep this up. We're losing we're losing voters. We're also losing people who are legislators in our own party flipping to the Republican Party on the issue of school choice. It's such a no-brainer policy that's popular with voters. Let's start to support parents, and you'll have some more defections coming from Democrats, and it'll become more of a bipartisan or nonpartisan issue once it becomes painful enough at the ballot box. But again, it's not going to be logic that changes the mind of the Democratic politicians. It needs to be a shift in power dynamics. And Milton Friedman said this best. He said a lot of things really well. He was a great speaker. But Milton Friedman, Nobel laureate economist, once famously said that it's the way that you change things is not about putting the right people into office. That could help, obviously, if they support your policy. But the way that you truly change things is by creating a climate of public opinion where it becomes politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right things. And I think we're reaching that moment where it's becoming such a political winner, it's becoming politically advantageous to do the right thing and support parental rights in education, that we're going to see all the Republicans getting on board, which they weren't before, and more of the Democrats either flipping on the issue or becoming less opposed to the issue. And we actually had 2 Democrats who are now governor in the midterms last year support school choice right before the midterm elections. One of them being Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He's kind of blown up in the news in the past couple of months, where he went on Fox News actually recently supporting school choice. And then more recently, however, he ended up caving to the teachers unions and said, I support it, but, the Republicans and the Democrats in the legislature, they couldn't come to a deal. So, I have to veto it, even though I promised to get this done. I'm going to veto my own campaign promise. I mean, that just seems like a dumb political move to me, but it really goes to show you how some Democrats are starting to grapple with the issue. Whereas before they just say, oh no, I'm against that. That defunds the public schools. I can't be for that. Now you're at least having them struggle with this concept. They're having to deal with the teachers unions and the kids unions, their parents, and you see them kind of struggling back and forth with this tug of war between these two interest groups, whereas before they were just owned by the teachers unions. Now, I don't like that Josh Shapiro flipped and ultimately caved to the teachers unions, but I do like that he is voicing support for the concept, not to the same degree as Republicans, where his Republican opponent called for universal school choice. He said, on the campaign trail, he said, I'd support lifeline scholarships for kids in failing schools, which is only about 15% of the school-age population in Pennsylvania. It was more of an incremental approach. But hey, that's a lot better than saying I'm totally against this. He ultimately killed that watered-down proposal by saying he's going to veto it. But the fight isn't over, actually, in Pennsylvania yet. The Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, they have a few more cards to play. So potentially, it can still get done in Pennsylvania this year to a limited degree. But I think that's that is the path forward. I think it's going to be something that I call bipartisanship through hyperpartisanship. The more that the GOP, the Republican Party, leans into parental rights as a political winner, the more it becomes politically disastrous for Democrats to oppose it. And at some point, they're going to have to come along too. I think we're seeing that shake out right now.
When you get invited onto these shows like Fox or CNN, CNBC, whatever, you get like 2 or 3 minutes to have this kind of debate, which you always nail, by the way. Well done. I love seeing that, especially when it comes across Twitter. But I mean, how are they important to, or is it just a big clown show? It's a massive waste of your time, and it depends how they edit it.
So I don't think it's a massive waste of time. I think it's better when I can do long form podcasts to actually explain the position. I think you're more likely to convince people that you have the right position if they listen to these longer form podcasts, if they're not already on board. But when it comes to people who you're rallying and you're trying to fire up the base, the 2-3 minutes works. They're already on my side. And if I can just hit the right talking points and provide the sound bites to express my position, I think that has a role to play too, to fire up the base. So I think that's a little bit more of firing up the base. There is some times where there's some disagreement on national television, but it's not a true debate, right? It's really short, and it's really depends on who has the better talking points. I usually have the better talking points, so that's helpful for me. I think Twitter has trained me to speak in sound bites. I didn't do that so much on this show. I kind of gave some long-winded responses because I knew we had two hours, right? If we wanted to. But when it comes to Twitter, if you want to win a Twitter battle, you better have a very quick, snarky response that's accurate at the same time, or else, I don't know if you've seen the new community notes feature where there's fact checks being slapped on people's tweets. So Randy Weingarten, who I've mentioned too many times in this podcast, the teachers union president, she constantly rails against Republicans. She constantly rails against school choice. And she fought to keep the schools closed. But recently she had to go testify before Congress to try to explain herself. So what did she do? Like any high-level teachers union boss, she gaslighted the public in front of Congress and said, no, actually, we didn't fight to close the schools. We were fighting to keep them open as much as possible since April of 2020. We put out a plan to do it. It's like, if you really fought to keep the schools open, why couldn't you get it done? Why did you have teacher strikes into 2022 over COVID? In Chicago, they voted to strike in 2022. I mean, 2 weeks to slow the spread turned into 2 years to flatten a generation of kids. And it was a total money grab. I mean, they held children's education hostage to secure multiple multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from the government. They ended up getting at least $130 billion in so-called COVID relief since March of 2020, just from the federal sources. Obviously, the states had bailouts too. And they haven't spent a majority of that money yet. If it was really necessary to open the schools, why didn't you spend it? It's because they're saving it to pay people that they're hiring. It's all about, again, continuing the union apparatus that is a money laundering scheme for the Democratic Party. It's all it is. And there was a community note that I got slapped on her tweets because she was starting to tweet about, look, the Republicans tried to say I closed the schools, but we actually fought to keep them open. Wait, you lobbied the CDC. You were threatening safety strikes over this. You called any plan to reopen the schools by the president reckless. And time and time again, your local unions were fear mongering about reopening. In Chicago, they also had a interpretive dance video made by the teachers union to protest reopening schools. So it was just total clown show in that sense. And her tweets saying that actually reopen the schools got fact checked by Twitter, which is I think it was one of the new best features that Elon Musk has implemented with Twitter.
Right. Well, excellent. So I've heard you say Marxist a couple of times. Were you aware of the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto?
Yeah, public school system.
Yeah, exactly.
What did Lenin say? What did Lenin say? Give me your children for 4 years, and any children for 4 years, and they'll become Bolshevik.
Really? Yeah, I've heard. Give me a boy.
I don't know if that's not the exact quote, something like that. And I've heard it's also been falsely attributed to Lenin, so maybe someone else said it, but it's still the same kind of sentiment, right? I mean, it rings true that dictators need to use the heavy-handed government, including the government school system in some cases, to control the minds of other people's kids to like big government. And that's happened in the U.S. too. In Oregon, in 1922, they outlawed private education altogether. Thankfully, 3 years later, the Supreme Court in Pierce versus Society of Sisters overturned that bigoted law, and where they famously said, the opinion of the court, that the child is not the mere creature of the state. So you can homeschool your kids in the U.S. Thank goodness, and you can send them to private school if you want as well. You don't have to send them to the government school.
And just to point out, point number 5 of the Communist Manifesto is a central bank to control and manipulate the money. So here we are, people. We're all fighting the same battle here, and of course, one of the other points of progressive income tax, like socialism, communism, call it whatever you like. It's all rolled into one. But I'll start winding it up. I'll ask you. Usually, I ask a question along the lines of, if you had one orange pill left to give to somebody, who'd you give it to, and why? Because the orange pill being the orange pill that's going to instill that knowledge of Bitcoin into somebody else. But in your case, let's use a red pill that would instill the knowledge that you have about the education system and the knowledge you have about the power of giving the individual the choice of where to use that money and the choice of how to educate their own family. Who would you like to give that red pill to, and why?
Man, I mean, we need a class of people to have the red pill, and it needs to be parents. And they've already shown that they can make a difference by pushing back at school board meetings, where they ultimately got labeled as domestic terrorists. I don't know if you remember that, but the NSBA, the National School Boards Association, coordinated with the Biden administration, sent a letter to the Department of Justice implying that some parents should be investigated for domestic terrorism for showing up at school board meetings to protest types of curriculum that they don't like. I mean, it really just goes to show you, this whole episode with the domestic terrorist thing, is that, the fairy tale model of democracy would have you believe that the public school system is somehow accountable to the public because they have school board elections. Well, we saw how well that accountability actually works when parents saw they didn't like what was going on finally with COVID and the remote learning. They went and protested and said, I don't like this. You guys should change things. Well, what they're doing now is they're cutting off the mics of the parents so that they can't speak. They are trying to get them labels as domestic terrorists. The FBI even had a threat tag specifically made for parents protesting at school board meetings. I mean, when you actually push back and you disagree with them, they try to silence you and they don't listen to you. That's not accountability. Why? Because you can't vote with your feet and do something else. So you're more of a hindrance. You're more of a nuisance as opposed to a customer in the government school system. So I think all the parents need to wake up and figure this out. There's been a groundswell of support already, but if you had all parents understanding what I understand about the education system, things would look totally different today. We'd have all 50 states having universal school choice. But as far as one person, to be fair to your specific question, I would like to hear Elon Musk talk more about school choice and the problems of the government school system. He's been coming around on a lot of issues, but for him to really have his microphone in support of breaking away from the shackles of the government school system, that would be great news. I think he went to a private school too himself. And I think I've seen him tweet out before. I actually looked this up because I was interested on his thoughts on school choice. He's actually tweeted out the term government school before. So he's probably with us already.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like him to talk about it. Yeah,
for sure. All right. It's been awesome to do this. I'm so glad that we scheduled to do this after our original panel in Miami. And then, I didn't even get to see you after that because of the thousands of people that were there. But I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. I hope you got some value from it. How can people reach you? How can they add value to you? Are you looking for any help? What's the best way people can approach you and help out if they're so inclined?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. It's at DeAngelis Corey, and my DMs are open if you want to ask me any questions about anything you heard today or provide any other comments. But you can also help me in the fight for education freedom by signing the Education Freedom Pledge. It's a pretty easy website to find. It's educationfreedompledge.com or edfreedompledge.com for short. And then you can keep up with updates in your state with different bills that are flying through state legislatures. And you can contact your legislators to support education freedom. Again, that's educationfreedompledge.com.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. Good luck today at the conference. I hope you get to red pill a few teachers to leave those unions and save their money. And thanks for fighting the good fight.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Daniel.